Rebecca Martinez had been fighting the Department of Veterans Affairs for 3 years. 3 long, exhausting years of paperwork, phone calls, and bureaucratic runaround that seemed designed to break her spirit. Her father, Master Sergeant James Martinez, had died of cancer linked to his exposure to Agent Orange during his tour in Vietnam. The VA had initially approved his disability claim, but after his death, they suddenly reversed their decision, claiming insufficient evidence. This meant Rebecca's family would receive none of the survivor benefits they were entitled to. And worse, her father would be buried in a standard civilian cemetery instead of the military honors section he deserved. The woman behind the mahogany desk at the VA office had become Rebecca's nemesis. Patricia Holloway, Deputy Director of Claims Processing, was a career bureaucrat who seemed to take personal pleasure in denying benefits to military families. She was in her mid-50s, with steel-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and glasses that she peered over when delivering bad news. Patricia had never served in the military herself, but she wielded her administrative power like a weapon. "Miss Martinez," Patricia had said during their last meeting, her voice dripping with condescension, "I understand you're emotional about this, but emotions don't change facts. Your father's medical records are incomplete. Without proper documentation linking his cancer directly to Agent Orange exposure, we cannot approve these benefits. The case is closed." Rebecca had sat across from her, trembling with rage and grief. "My father served his country for 22 years. He was exposed to chemicals that gave him cancer. How can you sit there and tell me he doesn't deserve recognition for his sacrifice?" Patricia had simply shrugged. "The rules are the rules. I don't make them, I just follow them. Perhaps if your father had been more diligent about maintaining his medical records." The implication that her father was somehow negligent had been the final straw. Rebecca had stormed out, but not before Patricia called after her, "Don't bother appealing again. I'll be handling any future requests personally." What Patricia Holloway didn't know was that Rebecca Martinez wasn't just any grieving daughter. She was Captain Rebecca Martinez, a decorated Army pilot with 2 combat deployments to Afghanistan and Iraq. She'd been on leave to handle her father's affairs, wearing civilian clothes to all her VA appointments. She'd never mentioned her military service, partly because she was too grief-stricken to think clearly, and partly because she hadn't wanted to seem like she was using her rank to get special treatment. But Rebecca's patience had finally run out. She'd spent weeks researching Patricia's background, discovering a pattern of denied claims and frustrated families. Patricia had built her career on being the tough administrator who saved the government money by making it as difficult as possible for veterans to receive their benefits. She'd even been featured in an internal VA newsletter for her cost-saving measures. Rebecca made some phone calls to her old unit, the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment. Her former squadmates were outraged when they heard the story. Word spread quickly through the tight-knit military aviation community about Master Sergeant Martinez's situation and his daughter's treatment at the hands of Patricia Holloway. The plan began to take shape during a phone call between Rebecca and her former commander, Colonel David Thompson. Thompson had served alongside Rebecca's father in Vietnam before transitioning to aviation. He was now nearing retirement and had been looking for a way to honor the veterans of his generation who were being forgotten by the system. "Rebecca, your father saved my life in Da Nang," Thompson said, his voice thick with emotion. "I was a green lieutenant and he pulled me out of an ambush. I owe him everything. Let me make some calls." Within hours, Thompson had reached out to the Old Guard, the 3rd Infantry Regiment responsible for military honors at Arlington National Cemetery. He also contacted the Army's Special Operations Command and the Vietnam Veterans Association. The story of Master Sergeant Martinez and his daughter's treatment spread like wildfire through military channels. Rebecca learned that her father's original unit had been preparing a memorial ceremony for their fallen brothers, including several who had died from Agent Orange-related illnesses. The ceremony was scheduled for the following month at Arlington National Cemetery, and they wanted to honor Master Sergeant Martinez posthumously, regardless of the VA's decision. Meanwhile, Patricia Holloway was enjoying what she thought was another victory. She'd successfully blocked another benefits claim, saving the government thousands of dollars. She bragged to her colleagues about how she'd handled the emotional daughter and her frivolous claims. Patricia had no idea that her dismissive treatment of Rebecca Martinez was about to become a career-ending mistake. The breakthrough came when Rebecca's former wingman, Chief Warrant Officer Michael Chen, discovered something crucial in the VA's own database. Patricia had been systematically denying claims from Vietnam veterans, regardless of the evidence. She developed a template of standard rejections that she used to quickly dispose of cases without proper review. More damning, she'd been falsifying her review times, claiming to have spent hours examining cases that she'd actually dismissed in minutes. Michael brought this information to Rebecca, along with something else, an offer from his current unit. The 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment was planning a training exercise that would take them near the cemetery where Master Sergeant Martinez was buried. They wanted to perform a flyover in his honor, and they had a special request for Rebecca. "We want you to pilot the lead aircraft," Michael explained. "Your father deserves military honors, even if the VA won't give them to him. Consider this our way of saying thank you for his service." Rebecca felt tears streaming down her face. Her brothers and sisters in arms hadn't forgotten her father, even if the bureaucrats had. But she wanted more than just a ceremony. She wanted Patricia Holloway to understand exactly who she'd been dismissing and disrespecting. The plan they developed was elegant in its simplicity. The training exercise would be perfectly legal and properly authorized. The flyover would occur during a scheduled memorial service for Master Sergeant Martinez, and Patricia Holloway would be there to witness it all, though she didn't know it yet. Rebecca's first step was to invite Patricia Holloway to the memorial service. She called the VA office, speaking in the same defeated tone she'd used during their last meeting. "Ms. Holloway, this is Rebecca Martinez. I wanted to let you know that we're having a small memorial service for my father next Friday at Ristwood Cemetery. I know you mentioned that you handle a lot of these cases, and I thought maybe you'd like to see what happens to the families after you deny their claims." Patricia was initially suspicious. "I'm not sure why you think I'd be interested in attending." "Because you said you were just following the rules," Rebecca replied, injecting just the right amount of bitterness into her voice. "I want you to see what those rules actually mean to real people. My father is being buried without military honors because of your decision. I want you to see his grandchildren asking why Grandpa doesn't get a flag." Patricia's ego was stroked by the invitation. Here was a chance to see firsthand how her tough decisions affected people, to witness the consequences of her adherence to regulations. In her mind, this would validate her position and perhaps even provide material for a future presentation on maintaining professional distance. "I suppose I could attend," Patricia said. "It might be educational." "Thank you," Rebecca said, her voice breaking slightly. "It means more than you know to have someone from the VA there. The service is at 2 p.m. I'll email you the details." What Patricia didn't know was that Rebecca had spent the previous week coordinating with military officials, veteran organizations, and local news outlets. The memorial service was going to be much larger than Patricia expected. Rebecca had reached out to her father's old unit, and word had spread through the veteran community about Master Sergeant Martinez's story and the VA's treatment of his family. The 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment had received official authorization for their training exercise, which would include a formation flight over the cemetery. Rebecca had been cleared to pilot the lead Blackhawk helicopter, with her father's old unit patch displayed prominently on her flight suit. Colonel Thompson had also arranged for an honor guard from the old guard to attend the service unofficially. They couldn't provide official military honors due to the VA's decision, but they could attend as individual soldiers paying their respects to a fallen comrade. Rebecca spent the days leading up to the service preparing both logistically and emotionally. She studied the flight path, coordinated with air traffic control, and rehearsed the formation maneuvers with her fellow pilots. But she also visited her father's grave every day, talking to him about what she was planning. "Dad, you always taught me to stand up for what's right," she whispered to his headstone. "You said that sometimes you have to make people pay attention before they'll listen. I think you'd be proud of what we're doing." The local news media had gotten wind of the story through veteran advocacy groups. A reporter from Channel 7 News had contacted Rebecca, asking about her father's case and the VA's denial of benefits. Rebecca had been carefully noncommittal, but she'd agreed to an interview after the memorial service. "We're just trying to honor my father's memory," she'd told the reporter. "He served his country faithfully for over 2 decades. He deserves to be remembered as the hero he was." The reporter, Sarah Williams, had done her own research into Patricia Holloway's record at the VA. She discovered the pattern of denied claims and had interviewed other families who'd been affected by Patricia's decisions. Sarah was planning to attend the memorial service with her camera crew, expecting a human interest story about a veteran's family dealing with bureaucratic obstacles. She had no idea she was about to witness something much more significant. Friday morning dawned clear and crisp, perfect flying weather. Rebecca arrived at the airbase at 600 hours, 3 hours before the memorial service. She went through her pre-flight checklist with the methodical precision that had made her one of the Army's top helicopter pilots. Her crew chief, Sergeant First Class Maria Rodriguez, had volunteered to fly with her despite being on leave. "Ma'am, the whole squadron wanted to be here today," Rodriguez said as they inspected the Blackhawk. "Master Sergeant Martinez raised a hell of a pilot. He'd be proud." Rebecca nodded, not trusting her voice. She'd pinned her father's old unit patch to her flight suit, along with his Bronze Star and Purple Heart medals. Colonel Thompson had given her special permission to wear them for the flight. The other pilots in the formation were equally committed to the mission. Chief Warrant Officer Chen was flying the second Black Hawk, with Chief Warrant Officer Lisa Anderson piloting the third. They'd all flown combat missions together and understood the importance of honoring their fallen comrades. Meanwhile, at the VA office, Patricia Holloway was having second thoughts about attending the memorial service. She'd spent the morning reviewing Master Sergeant Martinez's file, looking for any detail that might justify her decision. The file was thick with commendations, medical records, and service documentation, but Patricia had become expert at finding reasons to deny claims. Her assistant, Jennifer Walsh, had been watching Patricia's increasingly aggressive approach to veteran claims with growing concern. Jennifer was a military wife whose husband had served 3 tours in Iraq and she'd seen firsthand how the VA's decisions affected families. "Ms. Holloway," Jennifer said carefully, "I've been looking at the Martinez case. His medical records clearly show Agent Orange exposure, and the timeline matches his cancer diagnosis. Are you sure we made the right decision?" Patricia glared at her assistant. "Jennifer, I've been doing this job for 15 years. I know how to read medical records. The Martinez case didn't meet our standards for evidence. End of discussion." Jennifer bit back her response. She'd been documenting Patricia's questionable decisions for months, hoping to eventually report them to the VA's Office of Inspector General. The Martinez case was just the most egregious example of Patricia's pattern of denying legitimate claims. At the cemetery, preparations were underway that would have shocked Patricia if she'd known about them. Veterans from Master Sergeant Martinez's old unit had arrived from across the country, some traveling thousands of miles to pay their respects. They wore their dress uniforms, many decorated with ribbons and medals from Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan. Rebecca's mother, Carmen Martinez, had been initially reluctant to make the memorial service so public. She was a private woman who'd spent 40 years as a military wife, supporting her husband through multiple deployments and career challenges. But when she learned about Rebecca's plan and the support from the military community, she gave her blessing. "Your father always said that soldiers take care of their own," Carmen told Rebecca. "If this is how his brothers want to honor him, then we should let them." The honor guard from the old guard had arrived in their dress blue uniforms, carrying a folded American flag. They couldn't provide official military honors due to the VA's decision, but they could present the flag to the family as a gesture of respect from the soldiers of the 3rd Infantry Regiment. Reporter Sarah Williams arrived with her camera crew, expecting to cover a small family gathering. Instead, she found herself documenting what appeared to be a major military ceremony. Veterans filled the small cemetery, creating an impromptu formation around Master Sergeant Martinez's grave. "This is incredible," Sarah whispered to her cameraman. "I've never seen anything like this for a non-official ceremony." At 1:30 p.m., Patricia Holloway arrived at the cemetery in her government sedan. She dressed in her most professional outfit, a dark blue suit that she felt conveyed appropriate authority and sympathy. She expected to find a small gathering of family members and perhaps a few local veterans. Instead, she found herself facing hundreds of soldiers, both active duty and retired, standing in formation around the gravesite. The sight was overwhelming and intimidating. Patricia suddenly felt very small and very civilian among all these uniformed military personnel. Patricia parked her sedan at the edge of the cemetery, suddenly uncertain about her decision to attend. The scene before her was unlike anything she'd expected. Hundreds of veterans in dress uniform stood in precise formation, their ribbons and medals glinting in the afternoon sun. The ceremony had attracted far more attention than she'd anticipated. She approached the gathering cautiously, looking for Rebecca Martinez among the crowd. An elderly veteran with a Vietnam service medal noticed her civilian clothes and approached. "Ma'am, are you family?" asked retired Sergeant Major Robert Hayes, who'd served with Master Sergeant Martinez in the 1st Cavalry Division. "I'm Patricia Holloway from the Department of Veterans Affairs," she replied, trying to project authority despite feeling overwhelmed by the military presence. Sergeant Major Hayes' expression hardened. "You're the one who denied Jimmy's benefits." Word spread quickly through the formation. The veterans had all heard about Master Sergeant Martinez's case and the VA's denial of his family's benefits. Patricia found herself the center of increasingly hostile attention from hundreds of decorated combat veterans. Rebecca spotted Patricia from across the cemetery and began walking toward her. She was still wearing civilian clothes, having changed out of her flight suit after completing her pre-flight preparations. Patricia didn't recognize her as a pilot, seeing only the same emotional daughter she dismissed weeks earlier. "Ms. Holloway, thank you for coming," Rebecca said, extending her hand. "I'm glad you could see what my father meant to his fellow soldiers." Patricia shook Rebecca's hand, nodding the firm grip and calluses that should have been her first clue about Rebecca's background. "This is more than I expected. I thought it would be a small family service." "My father touched a lot of lives during his 22 years of service," Rebecca replied. "These men served with him, trained with him, fought beside him. They wanted to honor him even if the VA won't." The ceremony began with a Vietnam-era chaplain, Colonel Michael O'Brien, offering an opening prayer. He spoke about sacrifice, service, and the bonds between soldiers that transcend death. His words resonated deeply with the assembled veterans, many of whom had lost friends to Agent Orange-related illnesses. Patricia felt increasingly uncomfortable as the ceremony progressed. Speaker after speaker rose to share memories of Master Sergeant Martinez, describing his courage, leadership, and dedication to his soldiers. These weren't the sterile facts she was used to reviewing in disability claims. These were personal testimonies about a man who'd clearly earned the respect and admiration of his peers. Colonel Thompson took the podium and began reading from Master Sergeant Martinez's service record. He detailed the medals, commendations, and combat actions that Patricia had dismissed as irrelevant to her benefits decision. Each accomplishment was met with murmurs of approval from the assembled veterans. "James Martinez was more than a soldier," Thompson said. "He was a leader, a mentor and a friend. He served his country with distinction in Vietnam, earning the Bronze Star for valor and the Purple Heart for wounds received in combat. He continued serving for 2 decades after Vietnam, training the next generation of soldiers. Patricia shifted uncomfortably as Thompson continued. Master Sergeant Martinez was exposed to Agent Orange during his service in Vietnam. The chemicals that helped him serve his country ultimately took his life. The very agency he trusted to care for veterans has denied his family the benefits he earned through his sacrifice. The colonel's words hung in the air like an accusation. Patricia felt hundreds of eyes focused on her, and she began to realize that attending this ceremony had been a serious mistake. She was surrounded by people who viewed her as the enemy, the bureaucrat who dishonored their fallen comrade. As the ceremony continued, Patricia noticed movement in the sky. 3 dark shapes were approaching from the north, growing larger as they flew toward the cemetery. The distinctive sound of rotor blades began to echo across the grounds. The veterans noticed the aircraft too, and a murmur of excitement rippled through the formation. Those with aviation experience recognized the sound immediately. Blackhawk helicopters approaching in formation. Rebecca checked her watch and allowed herself a small smile. The timing was perfect. The 3 Black Hawk helicopters approached the cemetery in perfect formation, their rotor wash creating ripples in the American flags held by the honor guard. Patricia looked up in confusion, wondering why military aircraft were disrupting the memorial service. The sound was deafening, and she had to cover her ears as the helicopters passed overhead. But instead of continuing on their flight path, the lead helicopter broke formation and began to descend. Patricia watched in growing alarm as the aircraft approached the cemetery, clearly intending to land. This wasn't a simple flyover. Someone was about to make a dramatic entrance. The assembled veterans moved back to create a landing zone, their movements coordinated with military precision. They'd obviously been expecting this arrival, which made Patricia realize that she was the only person present who hadn't been informed about what was happening. The lead Black Hawk touched down about 50 yards from Master Sergeant Martinez's grave, its rotors still spinning as the crew chief opened the door. Patricia watched in shock as a figure in full flight gear emerged from the aircraft, walking with the confident stride of an experienced pilot. The pilot removed her helmet, revealing shoulder-length dark hair and a familiar face. Patricia's mouth fell open as she recognized Rebecca Martinez, the woman she dismissed as an emotional daughter just weeks earlier. But this wasn't the grief-stricken civilian who'd sat across from her desk. This was Captain Rebecca Martinez, U.S. Army, decorated combat pilot and daughter of Master Sergeant James Martinez. Rebecca walked toward the formation, her flight suit displaying the patches and insignia of the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, one of the Army's most elite units. She carried her father's Bronze Star and Purple Heart medals, along with a folded American flag that had been blessed by the unit chaplain. The transformation was stunning. Patricia suddenly understood that she hadn't been dealing with just any bereaved family member. She'd been dismissing and disrespecting a highly decorated officer whose military credentials far exceeded her own civilian authority. Colonel Thompson stepped forward to greet Rebecca. "Captain Martinez, thank you for honoring your father with this flight. The 160th can be proud of both the father and the daughter." Rebecca saluted crisply. "Sir, it was my honor to fly for Master Sergeant Martinez one last time. He taught me that soldiers take care of their own, and today his brothers and sisters in arms are proving that lesson." Patricia felt the weight of hundreds of stares as the realization spread through the crowd. The woman she'd treated with such condescension was not only a military officer, but a member of one of the Army's most respected units. The emotional daughter she dismissed was a combat veteran who'd earned the right to wear the uniform Patricia had never been qualified to put on. Rebecca approached Master Sergeant Martinez's grave and knelt beside the headstone. She placed her father's medals at the base of the stone and spoke quietly, her words meant only for him. The assembled veterans maintained respectful silence, giving her the moment she needed to honor her father's memory. Then Rebecca stood and walked directly toward Patricia. The confrontation everyone had been expecting was about to begin, but not in the way Patricia had imagined. She'd expected to face a grieving civilian. Instead, she was about to be confronted by a professional soldier who understood exactly how the system was supposed to work. "Ms. Holloway," Rebecca said, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to command, "I believe we need to have a conversation about my father's case." Patricia tried to recover her composure, but her authority seemed laughably inadequate in the face of Rebecca's military bearing. "Captain Martinez, I didn't realize you were military. Your father's case was handled according to standard procedures." "Standard procedures?" Rebecca's voice remained calm, but there was steel beneath the surface. "Let me tell you about standard procedures, Ms. Holloway. Standard procedure is to honor the service of veterans who sacrificed their health for their country. Standard procedure is to provide the benefits that soldiers earned through their blood and sweat." The news cameras were rolling, capturing every word of the confrontation. Reporter Sarah Williams realized she was witnessing something far more significant than a human interest story about a veteran's funeral. This was a story about systemic failure, bureaucratic abuse, and a daughter's determination to honor her father's sacrifice. Rebecca's voice carried across the cemetery as she addressed Patricia, but her words were intended for everyone present. "Ms. Holloway, you told me that emotions don't change facts. You're right. So let me give you some facts about Master Sergeant James Martinez." Rebecca began reciting her father's service record from memory, her voice strong and clear. 2 tour in Vietnam with the 1st Cavalry Division. Bronze Star with V device for valor in combat. Purple Heart for wounds received during the Siege of Khe Sanh. Combat Medical Badge for providing aid under fire. 22 years of total service, including 4 years as a drill instructor training the next generation of soldiers. Patricia tried to interrupt, but Rebecca continued without pause. Agent Orange exposure documented in his medical records from 1968 and 1969. Cancer diagnosis in 2018, directly linked to dioxin exposure by 3 separate oncologists. Death certificate listing, Agent Orange-related cancer as cause of death. The assembled veterans listened intently as Rebecca systematically destroyed Patricia's justification for denying the benefits. Every fact was delivered with military precision, each piece of evidence building an unassailable case for Master Sergeant Martinez's entitlement to veteran benefits. "These aren't emotions, Ms. Holloway," Rebecca said, her voice rising slightly. "These are documented facts that you chose to ignore because it was easier to deny claims than to approve them. You built your career on the backs of veterans like my father, saving the government money by making it too difficult for families to fight your decisions." Patricia felt trapped. The news cameras were recording every word, and she was surrounded by hundreds of witnesses who clearly supported Rebecca's position. Her usual bureaucratic defenses seemed pathetic in the face of such overwhelming evidence and passion. "Captain Martinez," Patricia said, trying to regain control of the situation, "if you'd mentioned your military service during our meetings, perhaps we could have—" "Could have what?" Rebecca cut her off. "Given my father the respect he deserved. Ms. Holloway, a veteran's service record should speak for itself. You shouldn't need to know that his daughter is also a soldier to treat his case with the dignity it deserves." Colonel Thompson stepped forward, his voice carrying the authority of 30 years of military service. "Ms. Holloway, I served with Master Sergeant Martinez in Vietnam. I've reviewed his case file, and I can tell you that this is exactly the kind of claim the VA was created to honor. The evidence is overwhelming." Patricia looked around desperately for support, but found none. Even her own assistant, Jennifer Walsh, had arrived at the cemetery and was standing with the crowd, clearly uncomfortable with Patricia's handling of the case. Rebecca wasn't finished. "Ms. Holloway, you asked me why I invited you here today. It wasn't to make you feel guilty or to embarrass you. It was to show you what you're really doing when you deny these claims. You're not just saving the government money. You're dishonoring the sacrifice of men and women who gave everything for their country. The crowd of veterans began to murmur their agreement. Many of them had their own stories of bureaucratic obstacles and denied claims. They saw Patricia as the embodiment of a system that had failed to honor its commitments to those who served. Rebecca gestured toward the grave. My father is buried here without military honors because you decided his service wasn't worthy of recognition. But look around you, Ms. Holloway. Look at the men and women who came here today to honor him. They know what his service was worth, even if you don't. The other two Blackhawks had landed nearby, and their crews had joined the formation. The sight of active-duty soldiers standing alongside Vietnam veterans created a powerful visual representation of the military's commitment to honoring its fallen. Patricia realized that she was witnessing something unprecedented. This wasn't just a memorial service. It was a demonstration of the military community's rejection of her bureaucratic authority. These soldiers were showing her that they would honor their own, regardless of what civilian bureaucrats decided. The news reporter stepped forward with her microphone. Ms. Holloway, do you have any comment on Captain Martinez's allegations about how the VA handled her father's case? Patricia looked directly into the camera, knowing that her response would be broadcast to thousands of viewers. Her career at the VA suddenly seemed very precarious. Patricia stared at the news camera, acutely aware that her next words would likely define the rest of her career. The reporter's question hung in the air while hundreds of veterans watched her, waiting for her response. She could feel sweat beading on her forehead despite the cool afternoon air. The VA follows established procedures for evaluating all claims, Patricia said, her voice lacking its usual authority. Every case is reviewed thoroughly according to federal regulations. That's not what I asked, Rebecca interjected, stepping closer to Patricia. I asked you to look at what you're really doing when you deny legitimate claims. These men and women served their country with honor. They deserve better than bureaucratic excuses. The crowd of veterans began to shift restlessly. They'd heard enough bureaucratic double talk over the years to recognize it when they heard it. Patricia's non-answer only confirmed their suspicions about her true motivations. Sergeant Major Hayes stepped forward from the crowd. Ma'am, with respect, I've been dealing with the VA for 20 years. I've seen good people there who genuinely care about veterans. But I've also seen people who seem to think their job is to deny claims, not evaluate them fairly. Other veterans began sharing their own experiences. A Iraq War veteran described waiting 3 years for a disability rating. A Vietnam veteran talked about being denied benefits for Agent Orange exposure until he hired a lawyer. The stories painted a picture of systematic obstacles designed to discourage legitimate claims. Patricia felt increasingly isolated as the testimonies continued. These weren't abstract cases from her desk. They were real people describing real hardships caused by bureaucratic indifference. She began to understand the human cost of her efficiency measures. Rebecca watched Patricia's expression change as the reality of the situation sank in. She'd wanted Patricia to see beyond the paperwork to the real people affected by her decisions, and it appeared to be working. "Ms. Holloway," Rebecca said, her voice softer now, "I'm not asking you to break the rules. I'm asking you to apply them fairly. My father's case meets every requirement for Agent Orange benefits. The medical evidence is clear. The service records are complete and the timeline is documented. What more do you need?" Patricia looked down at her hands, then back at the hundreds of faces surrounding her. For the first time in years, she was seeing veterans as individuals rather than case numbers. The weight of her decisions suddenly felt overwhelming. I, I would need to review the case again," Patricia said quietly. "Perhaps there were details I missed." Colonel Thompson stepped forward. "Ms. Holloway, I have copies of Master Sergeant Martinez's complete service record, including medical documentation that was somehow overlooked in your initial review. I'd be happy to provide it to you." The colonel produced a thick folder containing meticulously organized documents. Patricia accepted it with trembling hands, knowing that her earlier denial of the claim would be impossible to justify once these records were properly reviewed. Rebecca watched Patricia examining the documents, seeing the recognition in her eyes. The evidence was undeniable, and Patricia knew it. The question now was whether she would do the right thing. "Ms. Holloway," Rebecca said, "I want you to know that this isn't just about my father's benefits. It's about changing how the VA treats veteran families. You have the power to make that change." Patricia looked up from the documents, her face showing a mixture of shame and determination. "Captain Martinez, I owe you and your family an apology. This case should have been approved months ago. I let my focus on cost-saving measures cloud my judgment about what was right." The admission sent a murmur through the crowd. It was the first time many of them had heard a VA official acknowledge a mistake, let alone apologize for it. "I can't change what's already been done," Patricia continued, "but I can commit to doing better going forward. Your father's case will be reopened and expedited. You have my word." Rebecca nodded, but she wasn't finished. "Ms. Holloway, I appreciate your apology, but I need more than words. I need you to commit to reviewing the other cases you've denied using the same standards you applied to my father's claim." The request was bold, but Patricia was in no position to refuse. She was surrounded by witnesses, facing news cameras, and holding evidence that proved her earlier decision had been wrong. Her credibility and career depended on her response. Patricia looked around at the faces surrounding her, understanding that this moment would define not just her career, but her legacy. The documents in her hands proved that she'd made a serious error in judgment, but more importantly, they showed her a path toward redemption. "Captain Martinez," Patricia said, her voice stronger now, "you're asking me to commit to something significant. If I agree to review cases using the standards that should have been applied to your father's claim, I'm essentially admitting that I may have wrongly denied benefits to other deserving veterans." "That's exactly what I'm asking you to do," Rebecca replied, "because that's exactly what happened. My father's case isn't unique. You've been systematically denying legitimate claims to protect your cost-saving statistics." Patricia felt the weight of accusation, but she also felt something else: relief. For years, she'd been operating under pressure to reduce benefit payments, losing sight of the VA's actual mission. Standing in this cemetery, surrounded by veterans who'd sacrificed so much, she finally understood what she'd become. "You're right," Patricia said, her voice carrying across the cemetery. "I've been so focused on following regulations that I forgot about the human beings behind the paperwork. I've failed in my duty to serve those who served us." The admission was stunning. Jennifer Walsh, Patricia's assistant, stepped forward from the crowd. "Ms. Holloway, I've been documenting cases where I believed our denials were unjustified. I have files on 17 cases that I think deserve another review." Patricia looked at her assistant with a mixture of surprise and respect. "Jennifer, why didn't you bring these concerns to me earlier?" "I tried," Jennifer replied, "but you made it clear that questioning your decisions wasn't welcome. I was planning to report my concerns to the Inspector General." The revelation that her own assistant had been prepared to report her practices was another blow to Patricia's confidence. She realized that her reputation within the VA was likely already damaged, and that her only hope of salvaging her career was to make meaningful changes. Colonel Thompson stepped forward with a suggestion. "Ms. Holloway, what if we established a formal review process? The Vietnam Veterans Association could work with the VA to identify cases that may have been wrongly denied. We could create a panel of veteran advocates and medical experts to provide independent review." Patricia considered the proposal. It would be time-consuming and potentially expensive, but it would also demonstrate her commitment to reform. More importantly, it would ensure that deserving veterans received the benefits they'd earned. "I think that's an excellent idea," Patricia said. "I'll need to get approval from my superiors, but I'm willing to recommend the creation of such a review panel." Rebecca felt a surge of hope. This was more than she'd expected when she'd planned this confrontation. Patricia wasn't just agreeing to review her father's case. She was committing to systematic reform. "There's one more thing," Rebecca said. "I want my father to receive the military honors he deserves. If his benefits are approved, will the VA arrange for a proper military funeral?" Patricia nodded. "If Master Sergeant Martinez's benefits are approved, the VA will provide full military honors, including burial in a veteran's cemetery if that's what the family desires." The crowd of veterans began to murmur their approval. They'd witnessed something unprecedented. A VA official not only admitting error, but committing to meaningful reform. It was a victory not just for the Martinez family, but for every veteran who'd been failed by the system. Rebecca walked to her father's grave and knelt beside the headstone. "Dad, I think you'd be proud of what we accomplished today. Not just for you, but for all the veterans who'll benefit from the changes we've started." The ceremony was winding down, but the impact would be lasting. The news cameras had captured everything, and the story would be broadcast across the country. Patricia's public commitment to reform would make it difficult for her to backtrack on her promises. As the veterans began to disperse, many of them approached Patricia to share their own stories and experiences with the VA. She listened to each one, understanding for the first time the real impact of her decisions. These weren't just case numbers. They were people who'd sacrificed for their country and deserved better treatment. 3 weeks later, Patricia sat in her office reviewing the Martinez file for the third time. The evidence was overwhelming, and she couldn't understand how she'd missed it during her initial review. The answer was uncomfortable but clear. She hadn't been looking for reasons to approve the claim. She'd been looking for reasons to deny it. Jennifer Walsh knocked on her door. "Ms. Holloway, I have the preliminary results from the case review panel. We've identified 43 cases that warrant re-examination based on the standards we applied to the Martinez claim." Patricia looked up from the file. 43, that's more than I expected." "Ma'am, I think it's actually a conservative estimate. We focused on cases with clear documentation issues, but there may be others where the evidence was dismissed too quickly." The magnitude of the problem was becoming clear. Patricia had built her reputation on being a tough administrator who saved money by denying claims, but she'd created a system that routinely failed deserving veterans. The Martinez case had forced her to confront the reality of her practices.